To the end, he never wavered, defending the Iraq War and the harsh interrogation tactics that defined his vice presidency, making him a lightning rod for critics, but an icon to conservatives.
Thank you all very much. Knock it off. A welcome like that's almost enough to want to make me run for office again.
Dick Cheney always spoke his mind, justifying interrogation practices later judged to be torture.
They were legal, essential, justified, successful, and the right thing to do.
In the end, his advice was even rejected by the commander-in-chief when George W. Bush fired Cheney's closest ally, Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld. It was a turn of events no one would have predicted when Richard Bruce Cheney became the 46th Vice President of the United States.
So help me God.
He had already served as the youngest White House Chief of Staff under Gerald Ford, a powerful congressman from Wyoming, and Secretary of Defense under the first President Bush. Born in Nebraska, Cheney's family moved to Casper, Wyoming when he was a boy. He won a scholarship to Yale but quit, finally graduating from the University of Wyoming and marrying his high school sweetheart, Lynn, a leading conservative author and commentator.
The man I married has a very interesting mind. Problems get redefined, and you find yourself thinking about things in new ways.
The Cheneys had two daughters, Mary, mother of two, whose same-sex marriage was strongly supported by her parents well before the Supreme Court weighed in, and Liz, mother of five and her father's political heir, elected to Congress from Wyoming just like he was, but incurring the wrath of Donald Trump for standing up against the former president and investigating the January 6th insurrection. In 1989, as the first President Bush's Secretary of Defense, Dick Cheney became known as the cool-handed leader of the first Gulf War against Saddam Hussein.
3 o'clock Thursday morning in the Gulf, the armed forces of the United States began an operation at the direction of the president.
During the Clinton years, Cheney made millions as CEO of Halliburton, the Dallas-based oil equipment company, until George W. Bush asked him to lead the search for a running mate in 2000, and Cheney ended up taking the job himself. He quickly became the most visible take-charge vice president in memory, briefing the press, briefing Congress, briefing the president.
The main reason I'm there is to serve him. He needs people around him who care only about his success, who are prepared to give him honest advice and never sugarcoat it.
He helped shape a cabinet some said looked more like Cheney's than Bush's, in a White House that for a while appeared to be a co-presidency. Cheney was the prime mover behind the theory, later proven wrong, that Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction.
We know he's been absolutely devoted to trying to acquire nuclear weapons, and we believe he has, in fact, reconstituted nuclear weapons.
Contrary to CIA reports, Cheney also linked Saddam to al-Qaeda and 9/11 and predicted Iraq would fall quickly.
Things have gotten so bad inside Iraq from the standpoint of the Iraqi people. My belief is we will, in fact, be greeted as liberators.
When the violence escalated into civil war, Cheney was blamed. There were political setbacks, an embarrassing quail hunting accident when he shot and wounded a companion. More seriously, the conviction of his closest aide, Scooter Libby, for lying to a grand jury about the outing of a CIA operative. Throughout his public life, Cheney also battled heart disease, suffering his first heart attack in 1978 during his first run for Congress. Just days after being elected vice president, he underwent a procedure to open a clogged artery, and soon after a pacemaker. Once out of office, Cheney underwent a successful heart transplant. Still, to the end, he stuck to his deeply conservative roots, making him one of the most powerful and controversial vice presidents in recent American history. Andrea Mitchell, NBC News, Washington.
And joining us now is Kristen Welker, moderator of Meet the Press, and our longtime NBC News colleague Pete Williams, who, among other things, worked as Dick Cheney's press secretary at the Pentagon and in Congress, a Wyoming native himself. And Pete, let's start with you. When you think about your old boss, Dick Cheney, this long life, he was one of the youngest White House chiefs of staff, then Pentagon, the defense secretary, then vice president. What do you think his legacy is?
Well, to me, his legacy is a person who had, yes, deeply conservative views, who loved his country and loved his home state of Wyoming. You know, a lot of people, as they rise through the corridors of power, sort of shed people as they move up. Not Dick Cheney. He just kept acquiring, and he was very loyal. I can tell you from personal experience, he was very loyal to the people who worked for him. And, you know, Lynn introducing him at a Republican convention, once said something that struck me as very true. She said, there is no conversation that wouldn't be improved by having him in it. I never came away from a meeting or a session with him where I didn't feel that I learned something.
Pete, in terms of his political legacy, the war in Iraq, his role in the war on terror after the attacks of 9/11, where do you think that's going to fit in terms of how he is remembered?
Well, obviously, it's an important part of his legacy, and I think it's essential to remember what a searing experience it must have been like to be in the White House the day of the 9/11 attacks, when the president's out of town and he's having to make these decisions, facing the possibility of ordering the shoot down of a civilian airliner and the Secret Service grabbing him and taking him down to the command bunker in the White House. The effect that must have had on him. I think that was a riveting experience for him that perhaps shaped some of his views in the years to come.
Yeah, I mean, he was for a long, long time kind of the emblem of the right wing of the Republican Party, but he kind of changed his tune in latter years, at least with regard to Donald Trump.
Absolutely. You know, he was a conservative, but he was never what you might call a social conservative. He believed in a strong foreign policy, but he didn't subscribe to some of the elements of the Republican Party that dominate it now. I think he held his fire early on in the first Trump administration because he didn't want to get crossways with Liz Cheney, who became a member of Congress from Wyoming. But he, I think, felt liberated in later years and did speak out against Trump.
Pete, thank you. Stand by for a moment. Kristen Welker here as well. To Pete's point there, yeah. I mean, you really had, Dick Cheney, who for decades was such a central figure in the Republican Party. How much, in terms of contrast, Dick Cheney versus what we see now in the Republican Party?
It's a great question. Nothing showcased the divide in the Republican Party, the old guard conservative Republican Party versus the new guard of MAGA, more than this splinter between President Trump and the Cheneys. Remember, candidate Trump in 2016 ran against his opposition to the Iraq War. That was one of his big talking points. As Pete said, he held his fire during the first Trump administration, but boy, he came out, said he endorsed Kamala Harris in this last election, said he was voting for her. He said, quote, "There's never been an individual who is a greater threat to our republic than Donald Trump." So searing language there. Donald Trump, not surprisingly, responded by calling him an irrelevant rhino. But from the perspective of the Cheneys and former Congresswoman Liz Cheney, who headed up the January 6th committee, they really felt as though they were defending the old guard of the Republican Party.
Well, he had a huge influence on our politics and our policy, had an expansive view of executive power. We hear echoes of that today from Trump administration officials as well. So, Kristen, we'll come back to you on Election Day, which is the other big story we're following.
And, Pete, thank you as well, my friend. Good to see you.
Hey, thanks for watching. And don't forget, you can catch the Today Show every morning on NBC or take Today when you're on the go. Just follow the Today podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen.